Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with some more freedom. Today we're going to be continuing our journey and our energetic investment into the Federalist Papers and the founding documents of this country. I believe that investing energetically by reading this aloud is investing my energy in the country and in the things that I actually want to see happen. I believe that we have a better union together, and it is better if we all understand why that is. And so I'm reading aloud the Federalist Papers. It's not for everybody, but you are welcome to tag along. We are going to start with Federalist Paper number 29, and we're going to do 30 today because that ends another section, and we left off at 28. So let's start. From the Daily Advertiser, Thursday, January the 10th, 1788, by Alexander Hamilton, to the people of the state of New York. The power of regulating the militia and of commanding its services in times of insurrection and invasion are natural incidents to the duty of superintending the common defense and of watching over the internal peace of the Confederacy. It requires no skill in the science of war to discern that uniformity in the organization and discipline of the militia would be attended with the most beneficial effects whenever they are called into service for the public defense. It would enable them to discharge the duties of the camp and of the field with mutual intelligence and concert at an advantage of peculiar moments in the operations of an army. It would fit them much sooner to acquire the degree of proficiency in military functions which would be essential to their usefulness. This desirable uniformity can only be accomplished by confiding the regulation of the militia to the direction of the national authority. It is, therefore, with the most evident propriety that the plan of the convention proposes to empower the Union to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states, respectively, the appointment of the officers, and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. Of the different grounds which have been taken in opposition to the plan of the convention, there is none that was so little to have been expected, or is so untenable in itself, as the one from which this particular provision has been attacked. If a well-regulated militia be the most natural defense of a free country, it ought certainly to be under the regulation and at the disposal of that body which constituted the guardian of the national security. If standing armies are dangerous to liberty, an efficacious power over the militia, in the body to whose care the protection of the state is committed, ought, as far as possible, to take away the inducement and the pretext to such unfriendly institutions. If the federal government can command the aid of the militia in those emergencies which call for the military arm in support of the civil magistrate, it can the better dispense with the employment of a different kind of force. If it cannot avail itself of the former, it will be obliged to recur to the latter. To render an army unnecessary will be a more certain method of preventing its existence than 1,000 prohibitions upon paper. In order to cast an odium upon the power of calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, it has been remarked that there is nowhere any provision in the proposed Constitution for calling out the posse comitatus to assist the magistrate in the execution of his duty, whence it has been inferred that military force was intended to be his only auxiliary. There is a striking incoherence in the objections which have appeared, and sometimes even from the same quarter, not much calculated to inspire a very favorable opinion of the sincerity or fair dealing of their authors. The same persons who tell us in one breath that the powers of the federal government will be despotic and unlimited inform us in the next that it has not authority sufficient even to call out the posse comitatus. The latter, unfortunately, is as much short of the truth as the former exceeds it. It would be absurd to doubt that a right to pass all the laws necessary and proper to execute its declared powers would include that of requiring the assistance of the citizens to the officers who may be entrusted with the execution of those laws, as it would be to believe that a right to enact laws necessary and proper for the imposition and collection of taxes would involve that of varying the rules of descent and of the alienation of landed property, or of abolishing the trial by jury in cases relating to it. It being therefore evident that the supposition of a want of power to require the aid of the posse comitatus is entirely destitute of color, it will follow that the conclusion which has been drawn from it in its application to the authority of the federal government over the militia is as uncandid as it is illogical. What reason could there be to infer that force was intended to be the sole instrument of authority, merely because there is a power to make use of it when necessary? What shall we think of the motives which could induce men of sense to reason in this manner? How can we prevent a conflict between charity and judgment? By a curious refinement upon the spirit of republican jealousy, we are even taught to apprehend danger from the militia itself in the hands of the federal government. It is observed that select corps may be formed, composed of the young and ardent, who may be rendered subservient to the views of arbitrary power. What plan for the regulation of the militia may be pursued by the national government is impossible to be foreseen. But so far from viewing the matter in the same light with those who object to a select corps as dangerous, were the Constitution ratified, and were I to deliver my sentiments to a member of the federal legislature from this state on the subject of militia establishment, I should hold to him, in substance, the following discourse. The project of disciplining all the militia of the United States is as futile as it would be injurious, if it were capable of being carried into execution. A tolerable expertness in military movements is a business that requires time and practice. It is not a day or even a week that will suffice for the attainment of it. To oblige the great body of the yeomanry and of the other classes of the citizens to be under arms for the purpose of going through military exercises and evolutions, as often as might be necessary to acquire the degree of perfection which would entitle them to the character of a well-regulated militia, would be a real grievance to the people and a serious public inconvenience and loss. It would form an annual deduction from the productive labor of the country to an amount which, calculating upon the present numbers of the people, would not fall far short of the whole expanse of the civil establishments of all the states. To attempt a thing which would abridge the mass of labor and industry to so considerable an extent would be unwise, and the experiment, if made, could not succeed, because it would not long be endured. Little more can reasonably be aimed at with respect to the people at large than to have them properly armed and equipped, and in order to see that this not be neglected, it will be necessary to assemble them once or twice in the course of a year. But though the scheme of disciplining the whole nation must be abandoned as mischievous or impracticable, yet it is a matter of utmost importance that a well-digested plan should, as soon as possible, be adopted for the proper establishment of the militia. The attention of the government ought particularly to be directed to the formation of a select corps of moderate extent, upon such principles as will really fit them for service in case of need. Thus, by circumscribing the plan, it will be possible to have an excellent body of well-trained militia, ready to take the field whenever the defense of the state shall require it. This will not only lessen the call for military establishments, but, if circumstances should at any time oblige the government to form an army of any magnitude, that army can never be formidable to the liberties of the people while there is a large body of citizens, little, if at all, inferior to them in discipline and the use of arms, who stand ready to defend their own rights and those of their fellow citizens. This appears to me the only substitute that can be devised for a standing army, and the best possible security against it, if it should exist. Thus, differently from the adversaries of the proposed Constitution, should I reason on the same subject, deducing arguments of safety from the very sources which they represent as fraught with danger and perdition. But how the national legislature may reason on the point is a thing which neither they nor I can foresee. There is something so far-fetched and so extravagant in the idea of danger to liberty from the militia that one is at a loss whether to treat it with gravity or with raillery, whether to consider it a mere trial of skill, like the paradoxes of rhetoricians, or a disingenuous artifice to instill prejudice at any price, or as the serious offspring of political fanaticism. Where, in the name of common sense, are our fears to end if we may not trust our sons, our brothers, our neighbors, our fellow citizens? What shadow of danger can there be from men who are daily mingling with the rest of their countrymen and who participate with them in the same feelings, sentiments, habits, and interests? What reasonable cause of apprehension can be inferred from a power in the Union to prescribe regulations for the militia and to command its services when necessary, while the particular states are to have the sole and exclusive appointment of the officers? If it were possible seriously to indulge a jealousy of the military of the militia upon any conceivable establishment under the federal government, the circumstance of the officers being in the appointment of the states ought at once to extinguish it. There can be no doubt that this circumstance will always secure to them a preponderating influence over the militia. In reading many of the publications against the Constitution, a man is apt to imagine that he is perusing some ill-written tale or romance, which, instead of natural and agreeable images, exhibits to the mind nothing but frightful and distorted shapes, gorgons, hydras, and chimeras die. This coloring and disfiguring whatever it represents and transforming everything it touches into a monster. A sample of this is to be observed in exaggerating and improbable suggestions which have taken place respecting the power of calling for the services of the militia. That of New Hampshire is to be marched to Georgia, of Georgia to New Hampshire, of New York to Kentucky, and of Kentucky to Lake Champlain. Nay, the debts due to the French and Dutch are to be paid in militiamen instead of louis d'ors and ducats. At one moment there is to be a large army to lay prostrate the liberties of the people. At another moment, the militia of Virginia are to be dragged from their homes 500 or 600 miles to tame the Republican contumacy of Massachusetts, and that of Massachusetts is to be transported an equal distance to subdue the refractory haughtiness of the aristocratic Virginians. Do the persons who rave at this rate imagine that their art or their eloquence can impose any conceits or absurdities upon the people of America for infallible truths? If there should be an army to be made use of as the engine of despotism, what need of the militia? If there should be no army, whether would the militia, irritated by being called upon to undertake a distant and hopeless expedition for the purpose of riveting the chains of slavery upon a part of their countrymen, direct their course but to the seat of tyrants, who had meditated so foolish as well as so wicked a project, to crush them in their imagined entrenchments of power, and to make them an example of the just vengeance of an abused and incensed people? Is this the way in which usurpers strive to dominion over a numerous and enlightened nation? Do they begin by exciting the detestations of the very instruments of their intended usurpations? Do they usually commence their career by wanton and disgustful acts of power, calculated to answer no end, but to draw upon themselves universal hatred and execration? Are suppositions of this sort the sober admonitions of discerning patriots to a discerning people? Or are they the inflammatory ravings of incendiaries or distempered enthusiasts? If we were even to suppose the national rulers actuated by the most ungovernable ambition, is it impossible to believe that they would employ such preposterous means to accomplish their designs? In times of insurrection or invasion, it would be natural and proper that the militia of a neighboring state should be marched into another, to resist a common enemy or to guard the republic against the violence of faction or sedition. This was frequently the case in respect to the first object in the course of the late war, and this mutual succor is, indeed, a principal end of our political association. If the power of affording it be placed under the direction of the Union,
There will be no danger of a supine and listless inattention to the dangers of a neighbor, till its near approach had superadded the incitements of self-preservation to the too feeble impulses of duty and sympathy. And so ends Federalist number 29.
And here we have an example of why we have a militia, right? The militia is supposed to be the check against the army, against an overbearing government. It is also supposed to be under the jurisdiction of the state, which is an interesting course of thought, right? That is, I'm sure we're going to get more as we go along, but listed here, this is talking about the National Guard, right? That's what it's talking about. It is an organized, state-focused fighting force. It is not necessarily the citizenry at large, although it is, in practicality, the citizenry at large. If you are an armed citizen of the United States, are technically part of the militia. You should be available for call-up for national defense if you have any arms whatsoever. If you are of fighting age and fit, you should be available for the militia. But we have very much a distinct fighting force that is state-centered and is organized and brought to bear by the governors, not by the federal level. It can be activated by the governors to assist, such as deployments. If you lived through the Gulf War, then you know that the National Guard gets deployed. And so, but it's not intended to be that way. It is supposed to be an addition and support facility for the Army while they're gone, for us here. They are to keep the government from coming in on us. There's a lot of talk about posse comitatus, and posse comitatus means that you can't use the Army for civil matters, right? Except in the case of an insurrection or a rebellion, you're not allowed to deploy the military. That's why they tried so hard to label a certain date in January an insurrection, even though it obviously was not. It is so that they can take military action against the people who did that. That is why they did that. The only thing holding tyranny in check across the entirety of the globe is our freely armed populace. The fact that we have at our disposal the call-up of millions of people. If there were indeed them little blue hats walking around trying to take freedom around, those little blue hats would go flying by a 30-06 or something along those nature. That is how it should be. That is the right and just outcome of that. Because any time that freedom is being oppressed, it is the right of the people to establish or abolish the government therein, and to see about their own self-determination in a way that they feel is the most beneficial to them. And outlined here is not that, right? What we have seen right here, the intention of this is that it be an organized force for the states to call up for their common defense so that they can react faster and in need, as opposed to the Army in general. Now, the Army in general, the standing Army, is supposed to be a thing because the common defense is a thing. They are to go and take over from the National Guard, from the militia, to do the regular Army thing against foreign invasion. That is the purpose of our government. It is to safeguard our freedoms in its entirety. The whole purpose of the government is to safeguard your freedoms, the things that have been endowed by your Creator to you. The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not necessarily catching it, but to chase it. The ability to do what you want without restriction from the government to large degree. We have greatly exceeded that, and we would be most benefited by returning to simpler times in large part. And now we're going to do Federalist paper number 30. This is concerning the general powers of taxation, and if you know me, we're probably going to talk about this one at the end.
From the New York Packet, Friday, December the 28th, 1787. Alexander Hamilton to the people of the state of New York. It has already been observed that the federal government ought to possess the power of providing for the support of the national forces, in which proposition was intended to be included the expense of raising troops, of building and equipping fleets, and all other expenses in any wise connected with the military arrangements and operations. But these are not the only objects to which the jurisdiction of the Union, in respect to revenue, must necessarily be empowered to extend. It must embrace a provision for the support of the national civil list, for the payment of the national debts contracted, or that may be contracted, and, in general, for all those matters which will call for disbursements out of the national treasury. The conclusion is that there must be interwoven into the frame of the government a general power of taxation in one shape or another. Money is, with propriety, considered as the vital principle of the body politic, as that which sustains its life and motion and enables it to perform its most essential functions. A complete power, therefore, to procure a regular and adequate supply of it, as far as the resources of the community will permit, may be regarded as an indispensable ingredient in every constitution. From a deficiency in this particular, one of two evils must ensue. Either the people must be subjected to continual plunder as a substitute for a more eligible mode of supplying the public wants, or the government must sink into a fatal atrophy and, in short course of time, perish. In the Ottoman or Turkish Empire, the sovereign, though in other respects absolute master of the lives and fortunes of his subject, has no right to impose a new tax. The consequence is that he permits the bashaws or governors of provinces to pillage the people without mercy, and in turn squeezes out of them the sums of which he stands in need to satisfy his own exigencies and those of the state. In America, from a like cause, the government of the Union has gradually dwindled into a state of decay, approaching nearly to annihilation. Who can doubt that the happiness of the people in both countries would be promoted by competent authorities in the proper hands to provide the revenues which the necessities of the public might require? The present Confederation, feeble as it is intended to repose in the United States an unlimited power of providing for the pecuniary wants of the Union, but proceeding upon an erroneous principle, it has been done in such a manner as entirely to have frustrated the intention. Congress, by the articles which compose that compact, as has already been stated, are authorized to ascertain and call for any sums of money necessary, in their judgment, to the service of the United States, and their requisitions, if conformable to the rule of apportionment, are in every constitutional sense obligatory upon the states. These have no right to question the propriety of the demand, no discretion beyond that of devising the ways and means of furnishing the sums demanded. But, though this be strictly and truly the case, though the assumption of such a right would be an infringement of the Articles of Union, though it may seldom or never have been avowedly claimed, yet in practice it has been constantly exercised, and would continue to be so long as the revenues of the Confederacy should remain dependent on the intermediate agency of its members. What the consequences of this system have been is within the knowledge of every man, the least conversant in our public affairs, and has been amply unfolded in different parts of these inquiries. It is this which has chiefly contributed to reduce us to a situation which affords ample cause both of mortification to ourselves and of triumph to our enemies. What remedy can there be for this situation but a change of the system which has produced it, in a change of the fallacious and delusive system of quotas and requisitions? What substitute can there be imagined for this ignis fatuus in finance, but that of permitting the national government to raise its own revenues by the ordinary methods of taxation authorized in every well-ordered constitution of civil government. Ingenious men may declaim with plausibility on any subject, but no human ingenuity can point out any other expedient to rescue us from the inconveniences and embarrassments naturally resulting from defective supplies of the public treasury. The more intelligent adversaries of the new Constitution admit the force of this reasoning, but they qualify their admission by a distinction between what they call internal and external taxation. The former they would reserve to the state governments. The latter, which they explain into commercial imposts, or rather duties on imported articles, they declare themselves willing to concede to the federal head. This distinction, however, would violate the maxim of good sense and sound policy, which dictates that every power ought to be in proportion to its object. It would still leave the general government in a kind of tutelage to the state governments, inconsistent with every idea of vigor or efficiency. Who can pretend that commercial imposts are, or would be, alone equal to the present and future exigencies of the Union? Taking into the account of the existing debt, foreign and domestic, upon any plan of extinguishment which a man moderately impressed with the importance of public justice and public credit could approve. In addition to the establishments which all parties will acknowledge to be necessary, we could not reasonably flatter ourselves that this resource alone, upon the most improved scale, would even suffice for its present necessities. Its future necessities admit not of calculation or limitation, and upon the principle more than once adverted to, the power of making provision for them as they arise ought to be equally unconfined. I believe it may be regarded as a position
warranted by the history of mankind that in the usual progress of things, the necessities of a nation in every stage of its existence will be found at least equal to its resources. To say that deficiencies may be provided for by requisitions upon the states is, on the one hand, to acknowledge that this system cannot be depended upon, and the other hand to depend upon it for the very thing beyond a certain limit. Those who have carefully attended to its vices and deformities as they have been exhibited by experience or delineated in the course of these papers must feel invisible repugnancy to trusting the national interest in any degree to its operation. Its inevitable tendency, whenever it is brought into activity, must be to enfeeble the Union and sow the seeds of discord and contention between the federal head and its members, and between the members themselves. And I did it again, I'm sorry, y'all. Can it be expected that the deficiencies would be better supplied in this mode than the total wants of the Union have heretofore been supplied in the same mode? It ought to be recollected that if less will be required from the states, they will have proportionably less means to answer the demand. If the opinions of those who contend for the distinction which has been mentioned were to be received as evidence of truth, one would be led to conclude that there was some known point in the economy of national affairs at which it would be safe to stop and to say, thus far the ends of public happiness will be promoted by supplying the wants of government, and all beyond this is untrustworthy of our care or anxiety. How is it possible that a government, half supplied and always necessitous, can fulfill the purposes of its institution, can provide for the security, advance the prosperity, or support the reputation of the Commonwealth? How can it ever possess the energy or stability, dignity or credit, confidence at home or respectability abroad? How can its administration be anything else than a succession of expedients temporizing, impotent, disgraceful? How will it be able to avoid a frequent sacrifice of its engagements to immediate necessity? How can it undertake or execute any liberal or enlarged plans of public good? Let us attend to what would be the effects of this situation in the very first war which we should happen to be engaged. We will presume, for argument's sake, that the revenue arising from the impost duties answered the purposes of a provision for the public debt and of a peace establishment for the Union. Thus circumstanced, a war breaks out. What would be the probable conduct of the government in such an emergency? Taught by experience that proper dependence could not be placed on the success of requisitions, unable by its own authority to lay hold of fresh resources, and urged by considerations of national danger, would it not be driven to the expedient of diverting the funds already apportioned from their proper objects to the defense of the state? Is it not easy to see how a step of this kind could be avoided, and if it should be taken, it is evident that it would prove the destruction of public credit at the very moment it was becoming essential to the public safety? To imagine that at such a crisis credit might be dispensed with would be the extreme of infatuation. In the modern system of war, nations the most wealthy are obliged to have recourse to large loans. A country so little opulent as ours must feel this necessity to a much stronger degree. But who would lend to a government that prefaced its overtures for borrowing by an act which demonstrated that no reliance could be placed on the steadiness of its measures for paying? The loans it might be able to procure would be as limited in their extent as burdensome in their conditions. They would be made upon the same principles that usurers commonly lend to bankrupt and fraudulent debtors, with a sparing hand and at enormous premiums. It may be imagined that, from the scantiness of the resources of the country, the necessity of diverting the established funds in the case supposed would exist, though the national government should possess an unrestrained power of taxation. But two considerations will serve to quiet all apprehension on this head. One is that we are sure the resources of the community, in their full extent, will be brought into activity for the benefit of the Union. And the other is that whatever deficiencies there may be can, without difficulty, be supplied by loans. The power of creating new funds upon new objects of taxation, by its own authority, would enable the national government to borrow as far as its necessities might require. Foreigners, as well as the citizens of America, could then reasonably repose confidence in its engagements. But to depend upon a government that must itself depend upon 13 other governments for the means of fulfilling its contracts, when once its situation is clearly understood, would require a degree of credulity not often to be met within the pecuniary transactions of mankind, and little reconcilable with the usual sharp-sightedness of avarice. Reflections of this kind may have trifling weight with men who hope to see realized in America the halcyon scenes of the poetic or fabulous age. But those who believe we are likely to experience a common portion of the vicissitudes and calamities which have fallen to a lot of other nations, they must appear entitled to serious attention. Such men must behold the actual situation of their country with painful solicitude, and deprecate the evils which ambition or revenge might, with too much facility, inflict upon it. And today's going to be a short one. We're going to go ahead and wrap this one up, but we're going to talk about taxation for a minute, because I hold some unconventional beliefs on taxation. And if you are new here, if you haven't heard this before, get ready, because taxation is not theft. Did I just butt hurt you? Did somebody just touch your fifis in an inappropriate manner? Taxation is not theft. It is the responsibility of the responsible citizen to ensure that the money is there. It is your job to pay as much in taxes as you possibly can. That does not mean all of your money should be going there, or even a majority of it. But if you are making enough money to be taxed, which is not necessarily the case, a lot of people receive money back from taxes that they never pay in. That is not good. But you are required. You are responsible for it. You should be proud of paying taxes. Because the honest to God truth is, you wouldn't do it if it was up to you. If you had to pay for the road in front of your house, you might. for that section in front of your house, but you're not going to pay for the road in front of your neighbor's house. You're going to get mad at him for not paying for it. You're not going to pay for the upkeep. You're not going to pay for the maintenance. You're not going to pay for people to come and cut the grass, but you sure as hell ain't going to want to do it yourself. The best argument against private roads that I can make is a good one. I live just outside of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I have worked in the chemical plants most of my adult life. I got out of the Navy, I went into construction, and I spent a lot of time at ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil holds most of the private property in the city of Baton Rouge. They have miles of roadways that is dedicated exclusively to them. It is inside their fence. It is entirely their responsibility to maintain, and it benefits no one but them if those roads are maintained. And they are shit, like absolute garbage. Potholes, sinks, bumps, cracks, absolute garbage, and have been for the entirety that they have been there. They will only fix them in extreme distress. And that is exactly how you would act as well. You may not like to hear that, but that is the truth. If it came down to you taking responsibility for the roadways, you would be pissed. You would be mad as hell that you had to pay for your neighbor's road. And so we delegate that. We have the ability to delegate to someone else to build our roads for us. That is an amazing privilege. It is a privilege to be able to pay taxes and have someone else work on asphalt. Because if you've never worked on asphalt, it is a miserable job. Especially down here in the South, where it gets extremely hot come August, and when you wake up and it's 90 degrees outside and 100% humidity, and it just gets hotter throughout the day. And then you get to go out and lay asphalt, which is 450 degrees plus. And you get to walk beside this machine and make sure that it gets put down and get all this heat radiating off of you, and you're drenched in sweat. But you get to delegate that to someone else. You get to pay someone else to do that for you, and that is a fucking privilege. You get to pay someone else to educate your children. Now, the quality of that education is entirely your fault as well, but you get to pay someone else to educate your children. You don't have to take the time out of your day where you're making money to do that, and that would be the case. You could make the argument that your wife would stay at home. Okay, whatever. She has to take the time out of her day. She has things that she's doing at the house if she's a stay-at-home mom. I know people like to think that stay-at-home moms just sit on their ass, but they don't. There's a lot involved with the upkeep of a house, and having someone at home to dedicate it to that is a wonderful thing. But if they're doing the house and the children, as far as education goes, then something is going to lack. We have the enormous privilege here of making money and being able to spend part of that money to do the things that we don't want to do and that we just simply would not do. But part of being able to have that privilege, that right, is the responsibility to ensure that the money that you invest in that is actually being used on that. Right? That it is actually going towards your roads and your education, and it's going towards the public services that you wanted to, and not being given as foreign aid to some country overseas that has zero bearing on us. Creating trillions of dollars of new debt that is borrowed, not revenue coming in, but borrowed money that you're going to give to some nation that is laundering it in large part, because that war is such a farce that it is unbelievable that the American people believe it is a real thing. We have the right to expect our government to do the things that we tell it to, but we have to take the responsibility to hold the people that we put in those places to account. If I am paying taxes to get the roads fixed, I have the right to expect those roads to be fixed, but I have the responsibility to ensure that the people I elect are spending my money on roads and not Ukraine, are spending my money on public education and not Gaza. Now, the public education system is a whole different ball of wax. That is a wonderful thing that we completely fucking misuse. We send our kids, and it is a babysitting service, and we tell them, don't worry about having to learn anything. Why would you want to learn anything? Learning things is stupid. You shouldn't learn things. You should just completely disregard information. That is what's happening in our education system. Now, I took responsibility for my kids. I made sure that what they were learning at school and what they were learning at home was the actual truth. I have a wonderful school system right here where I live. We get in a lot of trouble apparently, but we have a good school. Our kids graduate with their high school diploma, yes, but many of them that graduate with a technical degree and they go straight into the workforce with a technical degree, making more than minimum wage straight out of high school. That is because of our education system here and us here holding it to account, because we do. Right here in this city, our taxes are used on education and they are used well. Right here in this city, we actually have decent roads. There are problems. Louisiana, South Louisiana, where I live, is almost entirely swamplands, right? There's so much silt that everything settles and shifts. That is a real thing. But we're on top of it. They're building new infrastructure as we speak. It is part of a tax that we approved. Your responsibility is to ensure that your taxes are being used in the manner that you want them to. That is your responsibility. And if it is not happening, it is your right to remove the people who are not doing it. But you have to exercise that right. You have to insist upon that right. You have to say, hey, it is not cool that you keep running this same idiot. I need somebody new, or we're just going to burn the bitch down. That's what's about to happen here, right? We got an election in 2 years to get rid of Bill Cassidy, and if he is running again, I will vote for the opposition. I will let it burn down, because I will not vote for Bill Cassidy again. He has betrayed the American people in a very real way several times since he has reneged on his promises that he made 4 years ago. He made promises 4 years ago, and he completely reversed track on all of them after he was elected. So I'm going to hold him to account. I will not vote for him. I am pressing hard for somebody else to be running in that position so we can actually get a patriot in there who will actually have the best interests of America at heart and is not merely sending our money across the ocean. Mike Johnson, he's from my state. I ain't got no cut for him either. He's doing the same shit. I'm going to hold these people to account. You need to hold these people to account. Now, you may agree with money going to Ukraine. You may agree with money going to Gaza or Israel or wherever it happens to be going. That is your right. That is your tax money. That is your legal right. But it's your responsibility to ensure that the people you want doing that are in there. You're going to be diametrically opposed to me. I don't mind paying taxes. I'm praying for the chance to be able to pay more in taxes, believe that or not, at your own leisure. I want to be able to contribute more into my society. I want the responsibility of ensuring that it goes correctly. That is very real things. And this is a passionate project for me because I hear all the fucking time, taxation is theft. And if you think that, you're an idiot. Period. The end. That is all there is to that. If you think taxation is theft, you have not spent enough time thinking about it. You have not considered the actuality of human nature. You have not in any way considered history. If you believe that anarcho-capitalism is the way to go, you also are an idiot. You do not know what you are talking about. You have not studied history at all. If you believe that communism can work, you are an idiot. You have not studied history at all. You have no basis, no grounding in actual fact. Socialism is the same problem. They are all great on paper. Communism on paper is the ultimate way to live. I believe that communalism, which is separate from communism, is the way to go. Focusing on your local area, as small as you could possibly make it, and ensuring that everybody in that area is succeeding is the way forward. To make sure that everybody has their needs met without the government having to redistribute is the way to go. But that requires us as citizens to step up in a way that we are not comfortable with. It is letting go of anarcho-capitalism and communism. It is letting go of, I have to pay taxes, oh boo-hoo. It sucks to give your money away, I get that. But if it's going where it should and being used the way we want it to, taxation is a privilege. It is not theft. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up my little soapbox speech here because taxation is one of those things that I really get into. I I get the arguments against it, and you may not think I do, but I really do. I have spent a significant amount of times debating on whether or not taxation is theft. I used to believe it was. I used to say it was, but now I know it's not. I have spent the time logic checking it, going through my stack and making sure I got it right. I got it right. Taxation is a privilege. You have to keep the responsibility part of that. Right? Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion. I know I pissed some people off, but that's okay. I do that on a regular basis. Hopefully I brought enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. I know it can be hard to wrap around in your head that, yes, taxes are good. That can be a hard thing for people to understand and to say out loud, but it is true. Your problem is not the taxation. Your problem is the way that it's spent. Well, it's your responsibility to ensure that it is spent in the manner that you wish, to be vocal about how you want it to be out there actively advocating for responsibility in government, for responsibility in education. Those things should be expected. We in the United States should be the number one place on the planet. And we have allowed communism and socialism and anarcho-capitalism to make it otherwise. And it is time to not. It is time to take the reins of responsibility and stride into our greater purpose and to become the country that we could be. I fully and wholeheartedly believe that we can be the entire bastion of freedom for the whole planet. But if we're going to do that, we need a responsible and educated populace. Our electorate has to at least know what the fuck they're talking about. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.